Picture this. You've just finished another exhausting shift at work. The fluorescent lights finally dim behind you as you step out into the cool night air. The streets are quiet now, most of Tokyo already tucked away in their apartments, while you're still making your way home through the maze of narrow side streets. Your phone buzzes with a text from a coworker complaining about the late hours, but you barely glance at it. All you want is to get home, maybe heat up some instant ramen, and fall asleep to the distant hum of the city that never truly sleeps. But what if that simple walk home, that routine you followed hundreds of times before, led you to something that would change everything? What if accepting a small kindness from a stranger turned into something far more sinister than you could ever imagine? Tonight, I want to share with you a story that will make you think twice about accepting gifts from unexpected places, especially when the giver might not be entirely human. This isn't just about urban legends or ancient folklore. This is about how modern conveniences can become gateways to something much darker. The story I'm about to tell you comes from the everyday life of a young woman whose only mistake was being too polite to refuse what seemed like a harmless gesture. Her name was Mio Takahashi, and like so many people her age living alone in Tokyo, she thought her biggest worry was making rent each month. Mio was 21 years old, the kind of person who apologized when other people bumped into her on the train. She worked evening shifts at a Family Mart convenience store in Shibuya, scanning barcodes and restocking shelves, while salarymen grabbed their late-night meals and students bought energy drinks for all-night study sessions. Her life was ordinary in every way that mattered. She took the same route to work, bought coffee from the same vending machine, and followed the exact same path home every single night. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late September when everything began to change. The air carried that crisp bite that warned of the coming autumn, and Mio pulled her cardigan tighter as she locked up the store and began her familiar walk home. The streets were quieter than usual, with only the distant rumble of the last trains heading back to the suburbs breaking the silence. Her phone buzzed in her tote bag with a message from her co-worker, Yuki, complaining about the new manager's scheduling, but Mio was too tired to respond immediately. As she turned onto the narrow street that led to her apartment building, she passed the same row of vending machines she'd walked by every night for the past 8 months. The colorful lights from the drink machines created small pools of illumination against the darkness, their gentle humming adding to the urban lullaby that had become her soundtrack. There were 5 machines in total, lined up like glowing sentinels, offering everything from hot coffee to cold tea to energy drinks that promised to keep you awake until dawn. Tonight, something was different. The third machine from the left, the one that usually displayed rows of colorful soft drinks behind its glass front, had its bottom dispensing slot open. A single bottle sat in the metal tray, as if someone had purchased it, but forgotten to take it. The machine's digital screen, which normally showed advertisements for seasonal flavors, displayed a message that made Mio pause in her tracks. "Thank you, a free drink for you." She'd never seen this feature on any vending machine before. These weren't the high-tech models with facial recognition or loyalty programs. They were standard machines that took coins and dispensed drinks, nothing more complicated than that. But there it was, a perfectly clear message accompanied by a bottle of what appeared to be green tea, sitting in the tray like a gift waiting to be claimed. Mio glanced around the empty street, looking for someone who might have forgotten their purchase. The sidewalks were deserted, except for a stray cat picking through garbage near a telephone pole. She checked her phone for the time, 11:52 p.m., wondering if perhaps this was some kind of late-night promotion she'd never heard of. Companies were always trying new marketing strategies, and free samples weren't uncommon, though usually they were handed out during the day by enthusiastic staff in matching uniforms. The bottle looked normal enough. Green tea with a simple label featuring a cartoon mascot with a friendly smile, the kind of drink she bought regularly during her breaks at work. But something about it felt different. Maybe it was the way the condensation on the bottle caught the light from the machine, or how perfectly centered it sat in the dispensing tray, as if it had been placed there deliberately rather than dropped by the machine's mechanical arm. Against her better judgment, Mio reached out and picked up the bottle. The moment her fingers made contact with the plastic, a chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the drink's temperature. It was cold, almost painfully so, as if it had been stored in a freezer rather than the machine's standard refrigerated compartment. The bottle felt heavier than it should have, and small droplets of condensation immediately began forming on its surface despite the dry autumn air. She slipped the drink into her tote bag and continued walking home, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over her. It was just a free drink, probably some glitch in the machine's programming or a promotional campaign she hadn't heard about. Nothing to worry about. But as she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, she couldn't help but notice how the bottle seemed to grow colder against her side, even through the fabric of her bag. Her apartment was small but comfortable, a typical one-room layout with a tiny kitchen, a low table that served as both desk and dining area, and a futon that she folded away each morning. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through the shared wall, but tonight, even that familiar sound was absent. The building felt unusually quiet as she unlocked her door and stepped inside. Mio set her tote bag on the small table and pulled out the bottle, placing it carefully on the wooden surface. Under the warm light of her apartment, it looked even more ordinary than it had outside, just a simple green tea with a smiling cartoon character on the label. But the condensation continued to form on its surface, creating a small puddle that slowly spread across her table. She changed into her pajamas and brushed her teeth, following the same routine she'd maintained for months. As she moved around her small apartment, she found herself glancing at the bottle more often than she meant to. Something about it drew her attention, though she couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the way the light reflected off its wet surface, or how the cartoon mascot's smile seemed to follow her movements around the room. When she finally settled onto her futon with her phone to scroll through social media before sleep, she noticed something that made her pause. The bottle had moved. Not far, maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, but it was definitely in a different position than where she'd placed it. The wet ring it had left on her table clearly showed where it had been sitting originally. Mio stared at the bottle for a long moment, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. Perhaps the table was slightly uneven, and the condensation had made the bottle slide gradually across the surface. That had to be it. Old apartments often had floors that weren't perfectly level, and her table was just a cheap piece she'd bought at a second-hand store when she first moved in. She set her phone aside and turned off the light, pulling her thin blanket up to her chin. The apartment fell into the familiar darkness that had become comforting over the months she'd lived here outside. She could hear the occasional car passing by and the distant hum of the city's endless activity. But tonight, there was something else, a sound so faint she almost thought she was imagining it. It was coming from the direction of her table, where the bottle sat in the darkness. A soft sound, like liquid slowly dripping onto wood. But that didn't make sense. The bottle was sealed, and even if it wasn't, the table wasn't high enough for anything to drip onto the floor. Mio lay still, listening intently, but the sound faded as sleep began to take hold. The next evening, exhaustion weighed on her shoulders as she finished her shift and began the familiar walk home. The convenience store had been busier than usual, with a steady stream of customers buying everything from late dinners to cigarettes, and her feet ached from standing behind the register for 8 hours straight. All she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and forget about the strange dreams that had plagued her sleep the night before. As she approached the row of vending machines, her steps slowed involuntarily. The same machine that had dispensed the free drink was glowing softly in the darkness, and once again there was a bottle sitting in the dispensing tray, but this time the message on the digital screen made her blood run cold. "You forgot something yesterday." Yesterday. Mio stood frozen in front of the vending machine, her breath forming small clouds in the night air as she stared at the impossible message. The bottle in the dispensing tray looked identical to the one she'd taken the previous evening. Same green tea, same friendly mascot, same unnaturally cold condensation coating its surface. But the words on the digital screen made her skin crawl with a fear she couldn't quite understand. "You forgot something yesterday." How could a machine remember what had happened the night before? These weren't smart machines with customer databases or facial recognition technology. They were simple coin-operated dispensers that had been standing on this corner for years, weathered by countless seasons and serving late-night workers like herself with nothing more complicated than the ability to drop a drink when you inserted the correct change. She backed away from the machine, her footsteps echoing strangely in the empty street. The sound bounced off the narrow buildings in a way that seemed wrong, creating an odd doubling effect that made it sound like someone was following her. She quickened her pace, her keys already in her hand as she approached her apartment building. Inside her small room, Mio immediately noticed the bottle from the previous night. It sat exactly where she'd left it on her low table, but something had changed. The condensation around its base had spread into a much larger puddle, as if the bottle had been sweating continuously for hours. The water had soaked into the cheap wood of her table, creating a dark stain that seemed to pulse in the dim light of her apartment. She grabbed a towel from her tiny kitchen and mopped up the water, but within minutes new droplets began forming on the bottle's surface. The plastic felt even colder than before, so cold it almost burned her fingers when she touched it. She pulled her hand away quickly, noticing that her fingertips had turned slightly blue from the brief contact. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every small sound from the street below, every creak of the old building settling, every whisper of wind against her windows seemed amplified in the darkness. She found herself staring at the bottle's silhouette on her table, watching for movement that never quite came but somehow felt inevitable. At 2:13 a.m., she heard it. A voice so soft she almost thought it was part of a dream, drifting through her apartment like smoke. "Drink it." Mio bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs as she searched the shadows of her room. The voice had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the walls themselves were whispering to her. She reached for her phone, its screen casting a harsh blue glow that revealed nothing but her familiar furniture and the bottle sitting innocently on her table. But in the brief moment before the phone's light dimmed, she could have sworn she saw condensation forming in the shape of fingerprints along the bottle's surface. The next evening brought a different kind of dread. As Mio approached the row of vending machines after another exhausting shift, she noticed she wasn't alone. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled business suit stood motionless in front of the same machine that had been dispensing the mysterious drinks. He wasn't inserting coins or making a selection, just staring at the colorful display behind the glass with an expression of profound sadness. "Excuse me," Mio said softly, her voice barely above a whisper in the quiet street. The man turned toward her, and she saw that his eyes were rimmed with dark circles, as if he hadn't slept properly in weeks. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something terrible. Has it given you something too? The question hit Mio like a physical blow. She found herself nodding before she could stop herself, and the man's face crumpled with what looked like a mixture of sympathy and fear. My friend, he said, glancing back at the vending machine. 3 years ago, he was walking home from work, just like you, found a free drink waiting for him, thought it was his lucky day. He took it home, said it was the coldest green tea he'd ever seen. Within a week, he was gone. Not missing, not moved away, gone. Like he'd never existed at all. Mio felt her throat constrict as the man continued. The police found no record of him. His apartment was empty, but the lease had apparently expired months earlier. His employer had no documentation of ever hiring him. Even his family seemed confused when I mentioned his name, like they were trying to remember someone from a half-forgotten dream. The man stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Don't drink it, and whatever you do, don't take another. It follows kindness, feeds on politeness. The type of person who can't refuse a gift, who says thank you even when no one's listening, that's what it hunts. Before Mio could respond, the man turned and walked quickly into the darkness, his footsteps fading until she was alone again with the glowing machines. She looked at the dispensing tray and saw that another bottle had appeared while they were talking, sitting there like a patient offering. The screen now displayed a new message. We were interrupted. That night, Mio made a decision that felt like the first sensible thing she'd done in days. She took the original bottle from her table, carried it to her small kitchen, and dropped it into her trash bin. The moment it hit the bottom of the plastic bag, she heard what sounded like a sigh echoing through her apartment, though she knew that was impossible. She tied the bag closed and carried it outside to the building's garbage collection area, leaving it among the other bags waiting for pickup. As she climbed the stairs back to her apartment, she felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally been lifted from her shoulders. But when she opened her door and turned on the lights, her relief evaporated instantly. The bottle sat on her table exactly where it had been before, surrounded by the same spreading puddle of condensation. Except now, something about the label had changed. The friendly cartoon mascot that had been smiling benignly from the green tea label now looked different. Its eyes, which had been simple black dots, now seemed to glow with a faint red light. Its smile had stretched wider, extending beyond the natural boundaries of its face in a way that made Mio's stomach churn with revulsion. And below the mascot, new text had appeared in spidery characters that seemed to shift and writhe as she looked at them. Almost time. Mio stumbled backward, knocking into her small refrigerator as she tried to distance herself from the impossible sight. The bottle hadn't just returned from the garbage, it had changed, transformed into something that bore only a passing resemblance to the innocent drink she thought she'd thrown away. The next day at work passed in a haze of anxiety and exhaustion. Every time she walked past the store's beverage coolers, the fluorescent lights above would flicker briefly, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Customers began to comment on the unusual chill in the air near the drink section, and Mio found herself making excuses to avoid that part of the store entirely. When her shift ended, she dreaded the walk home more than she'd ever dreaded anything in her life. The row of vending machines seemed to pulse with their own inner light as she approached, and the familiar hum of their cooling systems had taken on an almost musical quality, like a lullaby being hummed by something that had never learned the proper melody. The message on the screen stopped her cold. "Please accept your gift, Mio." Her name. The machine knew her name, though she'd never used a credit card at any of these machines, never signed up for any loyalty programs, never given her information to any company that might have shared it with vending machine operators. The impossibility of it made her legs feel weak, and she had to lean against a nearby telephone pole to keep from collapsing. How long had this thing been watching her? How much did it know about her life, her routines, her fears? The thought that something inhuman had been studying her, learning her patterns, waiting for the right moment to make its move, filled her with a terror so complete that she could barely breathe, In that moment, standing frozen on the empty street, with her name glowing impossibly from the vending machine screen, Mio felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. The machine knew things it couldn't know, had access to information that existed nowhere in any database. Her apartment lease was under a different name, a family name she'd stopped using years ago. Her work schedule changed weekly. Even her closest friends didn't know her exact route home or which machines she passed each night. Yet somehow, this collection of metal and glass and cooling coils had learned her most private details. She forced herself to keep walking, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the narrow street. Behind her, she could swear she heard the mechanical hum of the vending machine change pitch, becoming something that sounded almost like humming a lullaby sung by something that had never learned the proper melody. That night, sleep came in fragments again. Every time she began to drift off, the sound of dripping would pull her back to consciousness. It was coming from the direction of her small kitchen table, where the bottle sat in its ever-expanding puddle of condensation. But tonight the sound was different, heavier, like something thicker than water hitting the wooden surface. At 1:58 a.m., curiosity finally overcame her fear. Mio crept across her apartment floor, her bare feet silent on the cold surface. In the dim light filtering through her curtains, she could see the bottle more clearly than she should have been able to. It was vibrating slightly, so gently that she had to stare for several seconds to be sure she wasn't imagining it. The condensation around its base had changed color. What had started as clear water now had a dark, oily quality that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The liquid moved with a strange thickness, forming patterns in the puddle that looked almost like writing before dissolving back into shapeless stains. Her phone buzzed on her futon, the sound sharp and startling in the quiet apartment. A message notification glowed on the screen from a contact she didn't recognize, just a string of numbers she'd never seen before. "You forgot to drink it." Below the text was a photo that made her blood freeze in her veins. It showed her apartment from an impossible angle, taken from somewhere near the ceiling above her table. In the image, she could see herself sleeping on her futon, one arm draped over her thin blanket, her face peaceful in the artificial twilight of the city night. The photo had been taken from inside her apartment, from an angle that showed someone had been watching her sleep from above her table, right where the bottle sat in its spreading pool of darkness. Mio's hands trembled as she stared at the impossible image. The timestamp showed it had been taken just minutes ago, while she was lying on her futon, completely unaware that something had been documenting her most vulnerable moments. She dropped the phone and it clattered across the floor, the screen going black. In the sudden darkness, she heard the bottle cap begin to twist. The sound was unmistakable, that familiar crack and hiss of a seal being broken, followed by something wet, hitting the wooden table in heavy drops that sounded nothing like water. Without thinking, she grabbed her keys and ran from her apartment, barefoot and still in her pajamas. The cold night air bit at her skin as she stumbled down the stairs and onto the empty street. She had to get away from the bottle, from her apartment, from whatever was happening inside her small room. But as she reached the corner where the vending machine stood, she realized her mistake. The third machine from the left was glowing brighter than the others, its display flickering between advertisements and something else entirely. As she watched in horror, a bottle dropped violently from the dispensing mechanism, hitting the metal tray with enough force to crack the plastic. The screen now displayed a single message in characters that seemed to writhe and pulse. You accepted the first gift. I only need one. The bottle cap began twisting on its own, and something black and thick started seeping from beneath it, pooling on the sidewalk like spilled ink. The liquid moved with purpose, flowing toward a storm drain in slow, deliberate streams that caught the light from the street lamps above. Then she saw the hand. Pale and impossibly long, it emerged from the vending machine's dispensing slot, fingers stretching and grasping at the night air. The arm that followed was too thin, too white, and covered in the same dark liquid that had been dripping from the bottle. A face appeared in the machine's glass front, pressing against the surface from inside. It wore the same wide, unnatural grin as the cartoon mascot, but stretched across features that might have once been human. Its eyes glowed with that same red light she'd seen on the bottle label, and when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. You were so polite, so kind, just like the others. Mio screamed and turned to run, but her bare feet slipped on the cold pavement. She fell hard, her phone skittering away from her across the concrete. As she scrambled to her feet, she could hear something wet sliding across the ground behind her, getting closer. The last thing her phone recorded before the screen went black was a figure crawling fully from the vending machine, dripping and smiling, moving with joints that bent in ways human joints shouldn't. The audio captured her screams echoing off the narrow buildings, then silence. The next morning, police found Mio's phone near the row of vending machines. The third machine from the left appeared completely normal, displaying its usual array of colorful drinks behind clean glass. No free bottles waited in the dispensing tray. No strange messages flickered across the screen. Security footage from a nearby convenience store showed Mio approaching the machines at 3:17 a.m. In the grainy black and white video, she could be seen walking toward the glowing displays. But then, something impossible happened. Her shadow detached from her body and walked directly into the dark space beneath the third machine, disappearing entirely. Mio herself simply faded from the frame, becoming more and more transparent until she vanished completely. The police found no other evidence. Her apartment was empty. The lease apparently expired months earlier. Her employer had no record of anyone named Mio Takahashi ever working at the store. Even her co-worker Yuki seemed confused when investigators asked about her, as if trying to remember someone from a half-forgotten dream. But if you walk past that corner late at night, when the streets are empty and the city sleeps, you might notice something waiting for you. A bottle sitting in the dispensing tray of the third machine from the left, surrounded by condensation that seems too cold for the weather. The screen will flicker once, then display a message meant just for you, a gift for you. And if you're the kind of person who can't refuse a kindness, who says thank you even when no one's listening, who apologizes when others bump into you on the train, then maybe you should keep walking, because some gifts come with a price that can't be paid with money, and some machines hunger for more than coins. The next time you're walking home alone through Tokyo's quiet streets, remember Mio's story. And if a vending machine offers you something you didn't pay for, remember that kindness can be the most dangerous trait of all.